it officially ends. It officially ends in the month of September, unless there's further communication from our head office team. And for this particular JS contest, it is highly encouraged that the students use SuperMap products. So in the event that, for example, you've been working on your project for a period of 3 months, but then after 3 months, you're aware that, the license is now, it's only available for a period of 3 months. So in that event, you'd have to reach out to me and ask me for a license and ask me for would you please mute yourselves, please? Please keep yourselves muted. So in the event that you'd still need to continue with your project after the period of 3 months, so let's say you're looking at completion in the next 2 months, you would then have to reach out to me. I'll have it updated. I will post my email. That's how you can reach out to me, as well as the SuperMap office, Kenya office. So that's why I'll be focusing on license configuration and updating. And also during the course of our training, because you'll realize I'm not taking you through SuperMap every single day, or in the event, maybe I'm not even able to take you through every week, because I understand that there are other persons who are equally taking you through other items. So in the event that we still have ground to cover, I will then need to update your licenses. And I'll take you through this particular section of generating the computer information by computer name or by report file, then move on to license updating, solution to license activation failure, and the checking of your license status. For this particular instance is mainly where we know that for 3 months, that's 90 days. So if you'd like to keep track of how many days you have left to use the software, so be it 60 or 70, I'll take you through that as well. So now moving on to the software package. So the 2 ways to get the software packages, one could either be by downloading the package from SuperMap's official website. This is SuperMap's official website. All you need to do is type in SuperMap website. And I'd show you that this is the official website for SuperMap. So we have, of course, a tab showcasing the various products, especially in this particular instance, SuperMap JS 11i. 11i is our most recent product released last year by our research and development team in Beijing, China. We have varied solutions that you can look at. If you're interested in how you can use SuperMap, for example, for public safety or whatnot, water conservancy, if you're looking at cadastral management systems and whatnot, you could have a look at varied case studies that we've done in the past. On to support, this is where you'd mainly be going to download the product. So for example, if I click on support, download, and online help, you'd have, we have this tab where we're having SuperMap JS 11i, SuperMap JS 10i, and this is, as I've mentioned, 11i is it's our latest, the most latest release. So you could still, my preference is normally in using 10i, but 11i would also go as well. So we'd go under iDesktop. You notice that, as I mentioned, we're having iServer, iPortal, iEdge, iManager. Moving forward, I aim to not only show you, the basics of beat mapping or whatnot, but equally take you through perhaps some mini projects to get you started on, because as JS people, I'm sure you already have ideas that you're looking at. So looking at spatial thinking and then now being able to apply that in one of our products. So we have iDesktop, which is the main one. iServer is mainly for, publication and hosting the maps. We have iPortal, which is the no-code platform. iEdge, iManager, we have quite a lot. So you'd be going to under iDesktop and then choosing one of the varied versions. For example, the first one, and then you'd be looking at, for example, this one, SuperMap iDesktop, this particular size and type, and then clicking this download button. Now, one thing that you will notice is, for example, those of you who use Linux systems, we have iDesktop and we also have iDesktop X. Okay, we have iDesktop, and that's why you'll see here we have SuperMap iDesktop and SuperMap iDesktop X. So SuperMap is a cross-platform JS provider. By that I mean, it's not particularly only specified to users who use Windows, but for those of you who use Linux systems, you'd then be able to download SuperMap iDesktop X, which is this one, Linux 64, then move on to make the download. Equally, those who still use Windows can download now SuperMap iDesktop and SuperMap iDesktop X. You might be wondering, aside from the fact that Linux users can download iDesktop X, what's the main difference? Why would someone who's using Windows be able to download both? And the reason for that is iDesktop X has more functionality, in the sense that if you're looking at various themes or processing techniques, for example, if you're looking towards machine learning or something of a sort, being able to add more functionalities, if it's through Python automation into the application, you'll then be looking at iDesktop X. Yeah. So this is the fast way of making your download and installation. So while making after you've downloaded and unzipped the file, I think I'll also show you the file on my file explorer. But once you have already unzipped, you then move on to make the installation as an administrator. So I hope all is clear up until that point. So the recommended package, as you'll see, is, I'm not so sure if it's clear enough, but just as I mentioned, iDesktop, SuperMap iDesktop, Windows 64, this particular package. For Linux users, remember, it's iDesktop X, the one that's just right above. You can also download it from Google Drive. So for this particular instance, this is a drive, Kenya's office for a drive that hosts most of the software that we're using with the universities. So be it we're having iClient, iDesktop, iDesktop X, we're having iPortal, iServer, and sample data. Now, what you'll note is upon installation of your software, I think let me just show you that real quick. So let me just take you to where my package is. So for example, upon unzipping, so it's this one, upon unzipping, it's this file. This is the setup application file that I will be running as administrator, okay? And moving forward, it's also important to note the destination sort of, up until you get to where your file is, I'm not so sure what to call this, but it's always a rule of thumb to ensure that for however you title your folder names, ensure that you do not leave a space. It's normally a rule of thumb. That's why you'll notice even for the application package itself, whereas you'd be able to, put spacing, we are then using the hyphen, okay? So it's good because later on you'll notice, for example, if I'm trying to start up my iServer or iPortal, we'd have an error pop up because of this particular issue. So I think it's good that you know that. Now, upon your completion of installing the software, an important thing to note is SuperMap has its sample data. By that, I mean, let's say, for example, I'm a new user, I've just installed SuperMap. The number one thing would be, after successful installation, the number one thing would be, how then would I proceed to perform my analysis? Like, do I have data on hand? For those of you who have data on hand, good for you. For those of you who do not have data on hand and would like to perhaps experiment, so to speak, or have a test run on the software, SuperMap has sample data that is installed with the application itself. So you could either choose to install it separately from this particular website. It's download and help website. For example, I'm sure you've seen here we have SuperMap iDesktop sample data. So you could either choose to have this installed, but it's good that you know that upon installation of your product, SuperMap automatically comes in with its own sample data for you to do a test run on. By that, I mean, I'll just go to where SuperMap is, iDesktop And you'll notice right here, we have sample data. So under sample data, of course, the data is from China because they're the manufacturers, but you'll be able to notice, for example, if you do not have 3D data, I can say for a fact here in Kenya, 3D data isn't particularly freely accessible. So unless you've been working on a particular project or you know someone who has it, it's really hard to get it. So in such an event, you can be able to do a test run using this particular 3D data set. I'll take you through what exactly this particular file is, what the UDB or UDD file is, so no need to worry. And it's important to note, as you will later on see, that for this particular data set, it's actually for a section of Beijing. That's the, the capital city, a section of the capital city. So it's important to note it's actually not only for 3D datasets, but equally 2D datasets. So I'll be able to, when I now open my iDesktop software, you'll be able to see and appreciate datasets that you can work with just for, a test run. Now, moving on to the next phase, the sample data package is optional. It can be used for software learning and testing. I think I've already covered this. So we already have it here as a sample data, but also we have it here. You can install it either separately, but upon installation of your product, it normally comes in by default. So unless, for example, you're looking towards having a more detailed sample data set, you could perhaps download a separate package and zip and see if it's the same or not. So I hope everything is fine up to that point. So looking at installation, you will right-click on the setup file. I think I've already mentioned that. Run it as an administrator. For users who use the products for the first time, we provide a 90 days trial license. That's ideally 3 months. After users complete the product installation program, it will automatically activate the trial license. If the license is not automatically activated, you will see this particular pop-up. By that, I mean, ideally, the most ideal scenario is upon making your installation, so you've already downloaded the package from the website, you've unzipped, you've moved on to make the installation. The ideal situation is you would then proceed to have the 90 days trial license activated. And it's important to note that this particular license is actually node locked. What I mean by node locked is we have one license assigned to only one computer. Meaning that if you're looking towards having, for example, if you're having 2 computers or you're using a desktop at home and in school you're using a laptop, you cannot be able to use the same license for both. So each computer has its own license. So you'd equally need to have, SuperMap installed in your desktop, have its own license activated, the 90 days trial license. So in the event that you do see this particular pop-up, as I've mentioned, the most ideal scenario is the 90 days trial license kicks in automatically. So in the event that it does not happen, we expect to see this particular pop-up. And this ideally means that it cannot, it has not been able to activate the license. So what happens is, we go to license configuration and updation. So looking at the license configuration, what I will need or what a SuperMap representative will need will either be your computer name to be able to generate a license for that particular computer and apply a new trial license for you. So how to generate the computer information? I'm sure you know this, how to get your computer name. Most of you actually don't use the default computer name. The computer name by default is normally like something like desktop. As you can see here, what's coded in red, desktop 1R42EKE. For those of you who've changed it, I'm sure you know how to go around, getting the computer name. So what you ideally do is simply right-click on your PC as in the menu, and then select the option properties. By that, I simply mean going to your file explorer, under this section, this PC, simply right-click, go to properties, and under device name. Under device name, this is the name that you will have forwarded to me or any other SuperMap representative that you're reaching out to. Right. So you could either also go by submitting a report file. By going to submit a report file, I'll show you this in a bit. It requires you to look at, or rather, generate the file from the SuperMap License Center. And I'll show you this in a bit. So what is the SuperMap License Center? So let me just show you, upon successful, sorry. So upon successful installation of SuperMap, if I look at my SuperMap folder, these are all the applications or sort of components I expect to see. Now, the SuperMap iDesktop, this is the version that we'll be using and the application that we'll be using for mapping and, to do other things. So let's leave this for now. I'll come back to this in a bit. My interest is the SuperMap License Center. So for example, the case study would be, you've tried to install SuperMap, but then the license hasn't kicked in. That's the first scenario. So you need me or any other SuperMap representative to update your license. That's the first scenario. The second scenario is you have already exhausted the default 90 days trial license and you need a new license file generated for you. This is where you'll be coming. What you need to do is run it as an administrator. By that I mean right-click, more, run as an administrator. And yes, this is the tab that you should see. So we have home, license, connection, update, borrow, and setting. So at the home section, you will notice that there's a section that talks about the number of trial licenses that you have and the remaining days. So for me, for this particular computer, I have 64 days remaining for me to utilize this particular license. And remember, the default one is 90 days. So I'm expecting that when you install the software, the first thing, if you want to make sure that the number of days remaining is okay, it's legit, you just need to come here. You should expect to see perhaps remaining 89 days or something of the sort. For me, it's 64 days. Now, that's the home section. I wanted to show you how to, I've mentioned that for the generation of the computer information, you can either choose to right-click this PC, then right-click properties, then look at the computer name. That is what you forward to either of our representatives, and you equally have to specify if you're using SuperMap iDesktop 10i or 11i. It's important because the license is equally specific to the SuperMap version of the software. Okay, so, and then by looking at, if you want to generate a report file, how you do that is by going to the settings page and generating an operation report. By that, I mean just a small demo. You go to this setting page and click this, generate operation report. It would then take you to where exactly you'd like to have your report saved. And you'll notice that by default, it would want to save it as the computer name. So once it's already saved, I won't save it, but once it's already saved, that is the file that you then forward to one of the representatives of SuperMap. Okay, yeah, so I hope that's clear. When we go to license updating, so once you've either submitted your computer name, specifying the SuperMap computer version, as well as for those of you who'd want to submit an operation report, once you've already done that, the SuperMap representative will then forward you this particular file. It's a license file. Notice that the extension LIC9D could vary based off on the particular version. So how would you update it? So you'd equally start by opening the start menu, find the SuperMap folder, right-click on the SuperMap License Center. I've already done that. So this is the SuperMap License Center application, and use administrator to run it. If you do not run as an administrator, you might find issues later on when you're trying to update the license. So this is important. Yeah, so SuperMap License Center, select the path of the license file on the update page, and then click update to activate the license. So that ideally is, I've already talked about the home tab, I've already talked about the setting tab. For making an update, updating your license, you'd have to go to the update tab, select this particular icon so that you may be able to locate exactly where your license file is. So up until where you have your license file stored, you would then, based off on whether you used, if it's a SuperMap version 10i, with SuperMap version 10i, I would simply specify, for example, mine is 10i, I would select it, then open it. If it's 11i, if you've had SuperMap installed 11i, the license file extension is by default V2C. So yes, that's very important to note. You select it, click open. It should then be able to tell you that it has successfully updated the file. Okay, right. Yes. So that's ideally it. I've already talked about checking your license status. If you'd like to check if it's normal or not, at times we have issues where we have, for example, this is for the SuperMap license that has successfully been activated in one of the computers. At times you'll find that your computer would maybe tell you that no license file has been detected or something of the sort. So by default, as I've already explained, ideally we're expecting activation of the license, right? But in the event that it does not automatically pick it up, that's why I was taking you through all these. So you would then be able to contact either me or one of the SuperMap representatives to help you out. And by that I mean not only me, but we have representatives all over, not only in Africa. We have some in Europe, we have some in South America and whatnot, in China. So not only me, but whoever responds or acts on you quickly. But of course, ideally, being that I'm based here in Kenya, I'd be the first option. Right. So do we have any questions? Um, Before you ask me any questions, okay, do we have any questions still there? Do we have any questions? No questions, okay. Silence would, by definition, mean there's nothing to add. Fine. So before I move on now to the software itself, I'll just take you through just a bit on the solutions. For the solutions, I had already mentioned that if you're looking forward to perhaps gain some insight and see exactly what SuperMap has done in the past, you can be looking, for example, if I'd like to look at land management, just click on the particular icon button, then you'd sort of have the page is still loading, but you look at ideally some of the case studies or projects that we've done before. So just click on read more if you're looking at, for example, that's digital transformation of cadastre in Mexico. So for all these case studies, these are case studies that we've done all over, not only in China, but all over. We're yet to do one in my country, of course, but hopefully we'll get there. So it's simply to see and get insight on exactly how SuperMap was used to the realization of a particular problem, a problem statement, or whatnot. Yeah, great. So what I now want to do is start the software for you. As I had earlier mentioned, aside from simply taking you through the installation guide, I wanted to show you the application as well as just do a bit of touch base with SuperMap. So this is at the very bottom. I'm having a lot of application icons, but at the very bottom, right next to our studio, and to the very right, I'm having Civil 3D, AutoCAD Civil 3D. But you'll notice that I have two icons that may be new to you. So we have this blue one that is iDesktop 10i, and we have this one that is iDesktop X. So as I mentioned, Windows users, you can be able to install and use both iDesktop and iDesktop X. But for Linux system users, you'd have to install and use iDesktop X. You would not be missing out by not having iDesktop. They ideally have the same functionalities, only that now iDesktop X has more functionality in terms of added advantages in the application. So I'll start up my SuperMap iDesktop. So I've just clicked on the icon, and this is how it starts up. Great. So I hope everything is visible. Is everything visible from your end?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Right. So this is SuperMap iDesktop. I'm sure it's something new. It does not particularly have any resemblance to any of the other GIS software platform providers other than having a toolbar, other than having a place where you can display your map, but ideally not particularly. So I'll draw your attention to the very left. To the very left, we have the workspace manager. Under the workspace manager, you'll notice that we're having an untitled workspace. We're having other contents that are within that untitled workspace. The first one being data sources, maps, layouts. So an untitled workspace, you'll notice that as you progress to work with SuperMap, SuperMap is very structured with regards to how it's, having how it arranges its contents. So be it data sets that you have imported, be it maps that you have created, be it layouts that you have now finished adding, all the map elements into and made it aesthetically pleasing to your users, be it scenes. And it's important to note when you're talking about scenes here, this is where you're dealing with 3D data sets, okay? So an important thing and an added advantage I'd say with SuperMap is SuperMap allows you to have both 2D data and 3D data on the same platform, okay? So if you'd like to have 2D data, you might as well, import the data or create your own data sets in the platform. Proceed to do analysis if it's spatial analysis. If you're having raster data sets, proceed to do various raster analysis techniques. If you're having 3D data, you could still be able to now adding 3D data would then be displayed under this particular scene section. And hopefully we'll get there. Okay. So that's what I wanted to show you, that SuperMap is very structured with regards to how it arranges data sets, in the application. And it's a similar thing that you'll see here where we're having open workspace, new workspace. What a workspace simply means is the entirety of what you're working on, be it varied data sets. For example, if you're having a polygon, you're then having a raster data set, you're having another raster file, you're having point data and whatnot. A workspace simply houses everything. So open workspace would mean, for example, for me, I've used SuperMap for quite a while, so I can open a new workspace. For guys like you would have to create a new workspace that would house everything. A data source, a data source is what houses all your data sets. A data source is what houses all your data sets. And in this particular instance, it's important to note that for our workspace, the extension file name is .swmu or something similar to that. For data sources, as you'll see here, open a file data source, such as UDB data source. For data sources, the file extensions are either UDB or UDBX or even UDD. So of course, it's not something that you have to keep to really ideally really know, but it's just something that would help you navigate well. So opening a data source would mean that I've worked on SuperMap before and I'm simply opening a data source. For guys like you, if you haven't used SuperMap before, what you'll be doing is creating a new data source. And this is where SuperMap sample data comes in handy, okay? This is where SuperMap sample data comes in handy. For example, let me just open, for the particular workspace, you right click, you either choose to open file workspace, open file workspace, yeah. Okay, you cannot create a new file workspace at this point because ideally you've done nothing on the application. There's nothing that it can house. So let's say, for example, open file workspace. I'll open one of the sample data that I told you comes from SuperMap. So sample data, for example, China, you'll notice that the type is SMWU, okay? Once I click on open, I should be able to see the contents. You see, now my structure has changed a bit. It means that my workspace name is China. I'm having data sources, for example, these are my varied data sources. You can see we have linear data, we have polygons, we have point data and whatnot, and then we have a map, okay? So ideally, this is it. Then, for example, if you're looking at 3D data, because I had mentioned you can equally have both 2D and 3D. So let me open the 3D workspace that I saw from our sample data. 3D here. So you'll notice that here you can actually see the varied workspace extension files. Ideally, anything that starts with S, that's a workspace. Anything that would start with a U, that's a data source. So this is where we're having, you'll notice that we have CBD under data sources, we're having this particular data source called CBD. If I click this plus sign, we are having, for example, this is a polygon, this is a polygon, this is a table, these are models, or to be specific, these are 3D data sets. And under scenes is where I told you we're having, it's a scene that would then house your 3D data sets. Now, what did I mean by saying I can be able to work on both 2D and 3D? Before I even proceed, let me go to Layer Manager. To the very bottom, we're having Layer Manager. Layer Manager is where we'll be having, for example, the varied layers that you'll be using for mapping. And then to my very right, this tab is where we'd then be displaying our data. So for example, this is a polygon file. If I double click it, you either, to be able to display your data, you either double click the file or drag and drop onto this particular display. So this is for one of the mini projects I was doing with one of the students from DEKUT. This is a zone. She was coming up with zones to be able to do further analysis on. I think it was in the criminal sector. Being able to study criminal behavior based off on varied variables. So in this particular instance, she had to create varied zones based off on land use. That's functional zoning. So notice this is 2D data, okay? This is 2D data. If you'd like to look at the varied, for example, the attribute values in that particular data set, we right click and click on Browse Attribute Table. So we then have a new tab open that would be able to show you the attributes. I'm sure you're not new to looking at attribute data. So, and how to close a particular tab, you just click on the close, yeah? Now this is 2D data. When looking at 3D data, I'd like you to understand and appreciate that normally, when looking at mapping out 3D data sets, or 3D models. I think a model is a better term. When looking at mapping of 3D models, it's done on a 3D surface, yeah? You cannot map out a 3D model onto a 2D surface. Well, you can perhaps choose to, like you can bring in the 3D model onto the 2D surface, but visualization would be an issue. What do I mean by that? Is, for example, if I look at ground or maybe tree, this is a 3D model. How have I known? This is the icon for models, yeah? So if I choose to drag and drop the tree, if I choose to drag and drop the tree model onto this particular display, you will notice that, for example, I cannot see any trees, yeah? I can see nothing, no trees, no nothing. So let's say, for example, I would want to set it to full extent, set this tree layer to full extent. I simply right click, set it to full extent. You will notice you can still see nothing. So you have to be very conscious in as much as we're talking about being able to house both, 2D and 3D, and being able to perform analysis on 2D and 3D. You equally need to understand that, for example, if I'm looking at 3D data, they have to be mapped onto a scene, or rather a 3D environment. That 3D environment is this scene, okay, is this scene. So let me just shut everything, show you how, you've already seen that I've tried mapping a 3D model onto 2D, it hasn't worked. So what I'll do is I'll create a new scene, right click, I'll create a new spherical scene. So this is my spherical scene, yeah? And of course it's centered on China. So for example, I would then move on to, let's say I want to map out tree. I would right click and then add to current scene. or alternatively just add to new story point. But since I already created a scene, I can just say right click, add to current scene. This is the tree. Now I can choose to just select tree, right click, then zoom to layer. Can you be able to see? Can you see my trees on the 3D scene?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Yes. So I'm hoping it's the same for all of you. Yeah, thanks. So I'm hoping it's the same for all of you. So this is my 3D, this is the 3D layer for trees. If I choose to equally bring in building, I do not want to bring all models onto my scene because I'm not so sure if I'll still be able to showcase that given that I'm having this Zoom meeting. So let me also add it to my scene, and you can start to see a few things pop up. Yep. Are my buildings visible? Can you see my buildings?
Yes, we can see now.
Yeah, we can be able to see.
Okay. So now you can begin to understand. Now, for example, I am still on the same application. I've been able to bring in 3D datasets. I can be able to still work on 2D datasets. The only difference is 2D datasets will be on a planar environment. 3D datasets or 3D models will have to be on a 3D environment. And you will also notice that at the very top, I can't be able to see my ribbon very well, but let me see if I can change it. Okay. Right. You will be able to see that at the very top, now that I'm in a 3D scene, my ribbon, we have scenes, we have 3D analysis, we're having analysis techniques such as if you're looking to do visibility analysis or view shed analysis. Hopefully we'll cover this as well. A common case study that I normally use when looking at view shed analysis is for those of you who like watching thriller movies or crime movies. Ideally or normally, we normally have a situation where, for example, we've had a key person who's just been shot from an area, from a point on one of the buildings, right? And normally what you'd see is you'd have the cops, once they arrive, what's the next thing that they do? They then try to look at which direction did the shot come from, okay? So viewshed analysis enables you to be able to zone in on areas from your particular point of interest. In this particular case study, so from the place or the points where that guy was shot, which areas would give a visible, someone needs to mute themselves. So which areas would be visible from that point? Because of course you'd have to make a shot from an area that's visible to the person you've just shot or to the location where the person was standing. So this is what I ideally meant by having both 2D and 3D. If I'm looking at, so I'll just close this. I hope that's a bit clear. So let me just close that. I do not want to save this scene at this point, so I'll just click no. Yeah. For 2D data sets, excuse me. For 2D data sets, you'll notice that we have some spatial analysis. We have a spatial analysis tab to perform your spatial analysis. If you'd have a raster data sets, you also have raster analysis techniques and whatnot. We have traffic analysis. By default, we also have 3D data. So let me see who that is. Just one moment. Yeah. Right. So I hope that's clear. Okay, I started off by showing you, how to bring in sample data sets from, after you managed to do your installation and whatnot, and you then proceed to look at the data set that has already been curated for you and perhaps do testing or have a trial run on the software. Now, what I want to do is I'll just close this workspace. But what I had planned for this session is ideally, I had downloaded some Kenya administrative files. So let's say that now you don't know what to use the Chinese datasets. You already have your own datasets, whether you're planning on creating your new datasets or have some online. So for this particular session, it's simply, you'll notice that after I've taken you through how to install the software, I'm also keen on helping you navigate the software, okay? Now, the next step is I now want to start bringing in my own datasets. So I need to, what happens at SuperMap, you do not just import your linear file or your polygon file. You have to first create a file data source. And I've said file data sources are where you'd house all your datasets, yeah? So creating a new file data source, I will save it. You'll notice that the type is UDBX. I mentioned for workspaces starts with an S. For data sources, it starts with an U. It starts with a U, sorry. And you might be asking the question, what's the difference between UDBX and UDB? The only difference is that UDBX is the newer version, okay? We have also put in UDB, and that's because for the previous versions of SuperMap, this was the extension file. So I'll create my file, I'll give it a file name 02 because I already have 01. I'll save it. You should then be able to see 02 displayed right under data sources. So what this simply means is that you can have as many data sources as you can want under this section. So under 02, you would right click. Now you could either choose to create a new dataset or import a dataset. I'll show you both. For example, if you'd like to create a new dataset, this applies mostly, for example, if you're looking at digitization, yeah, where you're having a scanned photo, you've already done georeferencing, and now it's digitization of the map to have your new data sets. So in this particular instance, for example, you could be able to select if you'd like a point, line, region file. Is it an AutoCAD file? Is it a table? Is it a 3D model? Is it a raster file and whatnot? So I think I'll leave mine as point. If you'd like to the very right, okay, this is also where you can choose to edit it out. So let's say I leave mine as new point, but just so you know, you can edit it out to, of course, whichever name you'd like it to be. To the very right, you can equally set your coordinate system. So if the coordinate system that you're looking at, for me by default, because I'm used to using UTM and WGS 1984, the geographic coordinate system, mine is already here. So if your work would involve working on a different region with a different coordinate system, and it isn't listed here by default, you would have to click on more. That would then you'll then have a new tab open. This is for the coordinate systems. So we have the geographic coordinate systems, we have the projected coordinate systems, and an easier way is normally if you know the EPSG code, you could just search for it here, or if you know the name. For example, if I'm looking at geographic coordinate system, WGS, yes. So you could just search for it, select it, it would showcase the various properties of that particular coordinate system, and then click apply. Yes, so I will leave mine as is, and I will create my data set. So I have my new point data set that is created under my data source, but I'd like to now move further to perform digitization. So what I'll do is I'll simply drag and drop onto my display. And you'll notice that I cannot, even if I click on full extend, nothing would show up. Why? Because it's an empty file. It has no attributes. Even if I right click and check my attribute table, it has no attributes. So my next thing would then be to perform digitization. Now, how you would do digitization is pay close attention to, under the layer manager, we're having this particular file, and then I'm having something like a pencil. I don't know if you can see it, something like a pencil that's locked. So you'll just select it. Once you select it, it should turn blue, signaling that it is now active for editing and digitization. The next thing you do is under this drawing tab, you would select on point, and you would then have something like, a cross. So as I click on any particular point, I go digitizing. Now notice this would be the same thing for all. For example, if it's for point, this is for point. So if it's for a line, let me just show you for a line. Once I click it again, it means I have locked editing and it's okay. let's say, for example, I'd like to create a new data set that's, let me look at, for example, a polygon. So I'd like to create a polygon, a region. I will drag and drop it onto my display. And as I earlier mentioned, full extent, nothing would showcase. Why? It's empty. So I'd like to digitize. I'd click on my pencil, go to the drawing tab. This is where you'd be able to actually select if you're looking at, creating a parallelogram or a diamond or a right angle triangle. Let's say, for example, a right angle triangle. And you'd simply proceed to make your edits. Okay. Then if you'd like to stop, just simply right click and you have your newly edited files. But this wasn't what I wanted to show you through, take you guys through. What I wanted to take you guys through was, in addition to creating your data sets, also importing your data sets. Under importing your data sets, you should be able to have this particular tab open, and you would be clicking this particular first icon for adding a file. Once you click add a file, you should have a file explorer tab that would direct you to where your files are. Or for example, if you look at all supported files, you can bring in an AutoCAD file, an ArcGIS shape file, KML files, 3D models and whatnot. So, or even CSV files. Actually, let me show you two things. The first thing is on, I'd like to import a shapefile. And much like any other software, what you'd mainly import is actually the .shp file. So here under type, we have, of course, the DBF. For a shapefile, we normally say that a shapefile, the entirety of a shapefile is composed of about five or six separate files. But on importation, I would like to import this Kenya admin1 file, or I'd actually do all. But the type should be a shapefile. I have AutoCAD installed, so it's automatically read. My shapefile can be read by AutoCAD. So I will just select, for example, 3, click open. And you can choose to import that. But I also want to show you how to import, for example, a CSV file, which is something very interesting. Let me first identify where my file is. So for a CSV file, what normally happens is, if I'm importing a CSV file, but I do not want it to remain as a tabular file, you would want to import the CSV file, but then have the application read the spatial components of that file to be able to, make that transformation from CSV to shapefile. What SuperMap does is, the first thing to do is display all, of course, it's showcasing that upon importation, it will take it to the target data source, which is 02. Then the result data set, you can edit it out or have it remain as it is. The next thing is, you'd actually see what your data set looks like. This is how my data set looks like, what my data set looks like. And then, because notice, I want to import my CSV file, yes, but I want it to display it as a shapefile. So what I'll do is select import spatial data. If you're having a data set that has the WKT field as the coordinate section, you then select WKT field and specify the particular column, yeah? But for me, I know, even if I look at this, let me see if it's listed here. I'm looking for the latitude and longitude. Yeah, we have latitude and longitude. So I'd select coordinates. My longitude would be under the column name longitude. My latitude would be under the column name latitude. My altitude would be 0. But if you're looking at the XYZ, if you're importing a data set, a CSV data set that has columns showcasing the Z component, this is where you then specify the altitude column. Now, why am I insisting on this? This is because you will notice that, for example, for Esri's ArcGIS, what normally happens is you'd have to add normally what we do is add the XY points. Then once you specified your CSV file, specify the longitude column, specify the latitude column, and even looked at, for example, specifying the coordinate system. Once you have your events file, you then have to export that, so to speak. Yeah. Now for this one, you simply, on importation of the CSV file, you simply need to select import spatial data, specify the longitude and the latitude, and click import. Now notice it will then end up importing all these files. So if I click import, you should then have a small tab that's showcasing the progress of the importation. And to my left, I can see the added files. Let me just close this tab. I don't need it. No, I don't want to save it. You will notice that as you made the edits, your specific file, for example, your region file, your polygon file, and your points file was equally being updated. Yeah, so I think that's, of course, what should happen. For the disaster events file, you'll notice that it is now a shape file. I'm also hoping to take you through, it's a mini project I was doing on multi-hazard assessment in Kenya. So that's something that you should look forward to. I'll be taking you through hopefully mini projects, or even based off on your own inquiry. If you'd like us to focus on a particular topic, and then I'd show you through perhaps exactly how to go about it in SuperMap. And it's a great way to learn, because what I ideally do is not only illustrate to you how to use the software, but equally illustrate the GIS behind it, the GIS theory behind it. Yeah. So in this particular instance, we're having the Kenya Admin 1. I want Kenya Admin 1. The reason for that is because normally Kenya's administrative units, we have about, is it 4 or 5? We have the country itself. So just one linear polygon file. Then we have the second administrative, which is based off of the counties. We then move on to sub-counties. We then move on to wards. And then, of course, lower we look at locations, but that's not really, I don't think we have a shape file for that. So this is, if you're wondering how I was able to get this data, I used the Humanitarian Data Exchange. It's an open source, datasets that are here are free of this, free of charge. So for this particular small demonstration, I just opted to have it downloaded from this website. So I simply clicked, we have the data and resources, and then you just click this particular file and have it downloaded and unzip, and then you'd be able to get the specific files. So this is what we have. Okay, right. What else? Now, I still have a bit to cover. So what I think, okay, I'm not planning on staying that long. Perhaps in the next 10 minutes, we should be done. Anything that would be left over should be covered the next time. So what I want to show you is simply, for example, if I'd like to, I think I've already shown you about browsing the attribute table. Yeah, so we have varied, hold on. So you can be able to see admin 1, English, these are the names of the specific counties and whatnot, and that applies to all the Kenya shape files, yeah? So the next thing I'd like to show you is, for example, if you're looking at someone who would simply want to display the varied maps, okay, not the varied maps, but the counties by name, so to speak, that sort of a thematic map, simply display, or rather visual distribution of the counties, yeah? So the first thing I'd want to do is, for example, I know if you're coming from a background of EWQGIS or SGIS ArcGIS, you're looking at thematic mapping or choropleth mapping by quantities, by size or whatnot, yeah? So what I'd like to look at is in SuperMap, what we have is the creation of a thematic map. So I've simply right-clicked my layer manager and selected create a thematic map. Under create thematic map, this is where we're having, you can either choose to have your visualization, which is what I'm interested in, based off on the unique values. in this particular instance, what I'm looking forward to is in having a map that simply showcases the varied counties by different colors. If you're looking at a ranges map is either for, and we'll also cover this with the first mini project we'll be doing. A ranges map is, they've actually given you sample topics, be it population distribution, temperature distribution, elevation. A label map simply allows you to be able to display the labels. With S3s, I think it's add labels. For this one, it's sort of like under a thematic map. We have graph maps, dot density maps, and whatnot. So my interest is in unique values map. Once you click OK, to my very left, you should be able to see a new layer. The icon is actually different from the initial one. And to my right, you'll be able to see a thematic mapping sort of like pop-up window. Under the expression, you'll notice that in as much as if I choose to just shut the initial what is it called? This file, if I choose to then specify that I'm looking at that thematic map, maybe right, in as much as I was looking forward to then seeing, varied colors representing varied counties, my expression should then stipulate that I'm looking to perform a visualization based off on the names of the counties. And there you have it. This is then what we have. If you're looking forward to then perhaps add the labels. Okay, as a rule of cartography, I know that is it colors that are more, or rather a map showcasing a visual representation of more than 6 classes is not easily read. So it's normally about 5 classes, 6 classes. So looking at the rules of cartography, this map may not be the best, but as I've mentioned, this is simply for presentation purposes to equally showcase and show you how to go about, for example, if it's creation of a thematic map and whatnot. So if I'd then like to showcase the names of the counties, I'd then have to look at the labels map. Again, you could either choose to come here, right click and create a thematic map, or alternatively, under the ribbon, we also have a tab that's called thematic mapping. So we have unique value, which is what I used before, but now, as I mentioned, I'd like to label. So I'd then perhaps go to creating a label map. Now, under the label map, you'd equally see that to my very right, my expression, whatever you see, this KE023, KE010 is simply based off on this particular expression, that I'm saying that it should read values from this particular column. But my interest is in reading values for the names of the counties. So you can equally see that you're able to then see the names of the counties. So as I earlier mentioned, of course, we have how many counties do we have? 47. So we have 47 different counties, 47 names. So you can notice a bit of clustering to my very left, but to my centroid. But as I've mentioned, this is ideally just to sort of show you how you'd go about thematic mapping. This is in no way to show you that this is an acceptable way of cartography and map making. And as you see, when we'll start off with the mini projects, I'll be very specific towards still maintaining some of the cartography rules that we have. Because what I'm ideally doing, I am not just showing you how to use a software. I have to show you how to use a software while still applying some of the GIS principles that are used, okay? Yeah, so I think I'm done for this particular presentation. Maybe if you have questions, do we have any questions with regard to what I've covered and perhaps with regard to what you hope for as we move forward? I'll just stop sharing my screen. Do we have any questions? Do we have any questions? before I then pass the, I will then, yes, keep quiet. I saw you raise your hand. Where we can get the meeting recording. I believe, Peter, have you managed to record the session?
Yeah, I've managed to record, yeah.
Okay, so I think perhaps last with Peter, he's had the session recorded. I know that learning online can be a bit of a tiring task, but maybe I can plan to perhaps have a session, a physical session at the school. That way, if I believe a face-to-face encounter would perhaps be better. In some ways, it's better. Online is good in some ways, but also a physical one is better in some ways. So hopefully, I'll have that organized. If there are no questions, I'd like to request that we have our videos
Okay.
on.
Hello.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I had a question.
Yeah.
Okay, on the 3D part, like when you added the buildings part, that is the 3D part, like maybe I wanted my own 3D buildings, maybe like for Nairobi or Nyeri. How, is it a must that that I have my own data, or can I just get it through the SuperMap itself? Like, yeah.
Okay, so there are two things here. The first thing is SuperMap is a platform provider. By that, I mean SuperMap does not necessarily provide you with the data. What happens is you're coming in with your own data, performing analysis, then perhaps now coming up with be it a web application or simple maps, or if you're looking at application analysis and whatnot. So ideally, the workflow is you're coming in with your own data to do analysis. But as a Kenyan, I know getting 3D data can be a bit of a tiring task. So the first thing would be, for example, if you're already having like 2D data for, let's say, a section of Nairobi, you could get that from OSM, from volunteer graphic information websites, perhaps OSM. Now, once you've gotten your buildings shapefile from OSM, you could equally perhaps add another column that would stipulate the Z component. Now, the only issue would be for that particular Z component, for purposes of you trying out or trying to come up with, or rather trying to proceed to do some visual analysis on 3D, you might go ahead to perhaps assign arbitrary values. Okay, that's the first thing. You can go on to assign some arbitrary values on a column and then be able to stipulate that to then create a 3D, assign the altitude column, or rather the altitude figure would then be gotten from this particular column. But of course, at this point, it's not accurate unless you really have these values. That's the second thing. The third thing would be that if you have, for example, if you have, we did some, let's say you did drone flights for a particular region of Nairobi. And in this particular instance, of course, it limits our capacity because such information is costly, especially here in Kenya. But then, of course, I don't know if you've gone through, we normally have some 3D processing techniques such that once you have your imagery, you're then able to pass it through, be it if it's using, I think, Agisoft professional software, be able to generate the 3D components, then be able to add it to the map for further analysis. I don't know if I'm clear.
Yeah. I've understood it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Right, so everyone, please have your videos on. The reason for this is because this is all being documented. Yes, thank you, Timothy. All this needs to be documented, and I equally need to show my superiors that we had sort of like an activity with DEKUT. So starting with Peter and Francis, the leads, thank you, Timothy. The others, please do me a favor and do the same. If you're in a position to. If you're not much you can do about that. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Collins. No one is willing to support me. Thank you, Talam. Thank you, Elias. Hey, Elias is with Timothy. A few more, please. Not that it would be posted anywhere. It's just for where the ladies, no ladies.